And this is our final panel of the day. And my name's Jane Nelson. It's my great honor to moderate what I think is going to be a great panel. And the focus of our panel to close today's session is a call to action. And we want to hear from our panelists some very practical, specific ideas and priorities for what we as a community, and particularly the business network, can do, particularly sort of in the next 12 months. So what we can do as we go away from this meeting to take practical action. And I've got a great panel, as I say, to help us think this through. First of all, Paul Weisenfeld. Paul is the assistant to the administrator in the Bureau for Food Security at USAID. And as many of you know, the new administrator, or they're not so new anymore, but Raj Shah, and very much supported by Paul and USAID, have played, I think, a critical thought leadership as well as funding and practical role in really getting food security and nutrition both combined, but also very firmly on the international agenda. And Paul has been a real leader in that, so great to have you with us, Paul. Second, we have Andrea Ledward. Andrea is the Deputy Director for the Growth and Resilience Department in UK's Department for International Development. And again, I think a great example of what Andrea and her colleagues are doing to bring the concepts of growth and sort of economic growth and resilience and the ability to sustain growth and make sure that it's more inclusive together under one department. And Andrea will be sharing some of the things that they're doing. We then have Nick Hutchinson. Nick is the Managing Director of Unga Holdings Limited in Kenya. And Kenya and Unga Holdings, well, Kenya has both been a leader at a national level and as a country in this whole debate, but Unga Holdings, I think, is a great example of a domestically incorporated company listed on the Kenya Stock Exchange. I think you're over 80 years old, if I'm correct, over 100 years old, so over 100 years old. And I think an example of many domestic companies around the world that have actually been operating for 50 to 100 years in the whole area of food manufacturing, local milling, and processing and distribution. And then last but certainly not least, we have Matthew Kays, who is from the Rural Development, Food Security and Nutrition Unit at the DG for Development and Cooperation at the European Commission. And again, I think a great example where the European Commission is taking a lead in recognizing the need to put rural development, food security and nutrition under one unit and have this much more holistic value chain approach that we've been talking about for the last day and yesterday as well. So a great panel to get us going. I'd like everyone to just sort of start with the first question being, what do you each see as the big sort of challenges and key priorities for nutrition in the next 12 months? And what is your particular organization doing to address those priorities? And Paul, why don't we start with you?
Thanks very much. Is this working? Thanks very much, Jane. I really appreciate it, and thanks to Gain and WFP for hosting this event. Thanks also for mentioning Raj Shah, who's on the Sun Lead Group, and unfortunately wasn't able to make it, so I'm here representing him today. For us, the goal as a donor is clear: to reduce undernutrition. And we all know, as we've heard today and yesterday, that it's a complex issue. It involves issues of food access, availability, utilization. It involves behaviors of families, particularly women, access to clean water, health services, livelihoods. It's a very complicated issue. But it's clear to us, and I think that's what we love about the business network, that creating sustainable markets for nutritious foods is absolutely a key part of the solution. And that requires bringing in the private sector, because governments that's not their business to create markets and create sustainable markets. So we need to harness private sector creativity, energy, in order to bring scale and sustainability. One of the things that struck me when Mark talked yesterday was that private sector companies are not tripping over each other, jumping over each other to jump into this space. For me, it's clear, however, that if you look at the emerging markets, someone, I forget who, talked about the tremendous growth that we're seeing in the middle class in Africa, for instance, which has started in my time in development. That's a new phenomenon. The private sector is absolutely interested in investing in a big way in emerging markets in Africa, but not necessarily in this space. So the challenge for us as a donor, I think, is how do we create an environment that really facilitates responsible private investment towards this goal of improving nutritional outcomes? How do we encourage that kind of investment? And there, for me, I'd highlight four things that I think that we can focus on. Again, I'm speaking mostly from a donor. The first, to me, is real concrete, practical examples of partnerships that are delivering results on the ground. Because for those private sector companies that are absolutely interested, we have great examples with Unilever, DSM, PepsiCo, and for others who could be more easily encouraged to do it, I think they're really looking for what do they do. So it's incumbent upon us to come up with some real good examples, concrete examples. And I think GAIN is a leader here. The partnership that we're doing with GAIN on the marketplace for nutritious foods, the idea there is to provide some seed money, to provide funding for innovative ideas where we can develop concrete partnerships. And the Sun Network, I think, can help house those partnerships. So we really need to provide models, and there won't be one model, because I think there are a lot of ways to intervene in this, whether it's at food processing or behavior change activities. The second thing I'd say is there's still, and I think it was Mark who highlighted this, there's still a big need for research. It's an area that we don't really know. I mean, we're committed to integrating agriculture and nutrition. For us, the research shows clearly that investing in agriculture is at least twice as effective at reducing poverty as investments in other areas, and the research on nutrition is very clear. So for us, it's important to link the two. We want to see growth, reductions in poverty with positive nutritional outcomes. But there are different ways to integrate them, and I think there's still a lot of research that needs to be done in order to show what's the best way to make that linkage. What are the best agricultural interventions that have the best nutritional outcomes? That's a good area for donors, universities, think tanks to engage in and provide guidance to the private sector. So we're putting a lot of money behind a comprehensive learning agenda, and I think 4 out of 20 of our big impact evaluations we will do are focused on different models of integrating agriculture and nutrition, trying to see where we get the biggest bang for the buck. But the other area of research that I don't think has been talked about here today is things like aflatoxins and improved post-harvest handling. Because donors, there are a lot of things that we could do, and donors have to make decisions: do we invest in A, B, or C? And what's going to be the most cost-effective, the most impactful investment? And it could be that reducing aflatoxins will have an enormous nutritional impact compared to other investments. So we're doing a lot of investing in aflatoxin research and post-harvest handling. Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who's, I can't remember where they are here, is somewhere in the back, is a huge partner and has done a lot of work in that area. So I don't think that's been talked about, but I think that kind of research is important. The third critical area for me is the principles of engagement that David Nabarro talked about yesterday. I think it's in the realm of clear guidance to the private sector how to engage. And the UN principles of engagement and the document that's been done here, the strategic and operational plan, I think are a great guide here, but we need kind of broad ownership and consensus around those principles. So kind of feedback from the business community is really important. For me, the types of principles that are critical here are the ones that are outlined, things like transparency, accountability, a commitment to improving the health of women and children, having no unfair advantage, which is highlighted in the UN principles. But I'd also say something that's really evidence-based, that goes, that as we do more research, we need to spread the knowledge out through concrete ways. The last thing that we should focus on is capacity building, which is typically seen as in the realm of donors. There's clear, at the developing country level, there's a big need for capacity building of government institutions for quality assurance, for instance. And that's something that takes a long time, and you need to kind of beat at it for years and years. But I think it's also an area where we've seen companies like General Mills and DSM step in and provide capacity building for food processors in developing countries. And I think that's an area where there's a lot of scope for tapping the expertise of the private sector to get big bang for the buck for that capacity building beyond government institutions for private sector in developing countries. So those would be my 4 areas.
Great. I mean, 4 fabulous areas. I want to just follow up on 2 of them quickly, Paul, before going to Andrea. On the capacity building, I'm not sure if you were here during the afternoon yesterday, but in fact, Foco from DSM and a few other people, Unilever and a few other companies, talked about the idea of sort of pre-competitive business coalitions within countries around issues like creating demand, quality control, safety, food safety, etc. And do you see the potential for the donors, and I'd like you to answer this question as well, Andrea, when we come to you, to actually support sort of cooperative, pre-competitive efforts by business as a coalition, working with the government agencies at a country level?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we're partnering with, as well as other donors, with General Mills, DSM, Unilever on those set of issues. General Mills and DSM have stood up their Partnerships for Food Solutions group, implementing the SAFE program, and we think that's a great example of this kind of work. And it is pre-competitive work, but it sets a baseline that everyone, and a standard that everyone has to follow. So we're happy to contribute to that.
Great, and transfers technology and skills and capability.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then I'll actually probably come back to you after you've gone through everyone, but I'd like you to also share with everyone what you're doing on research with this, I understand, a coalition of universities that you're supporting. Because I think it would be interesting for the companies to know, because many of them partner with universities on scientific research. And it seems to me that there's an opportunity again
Absolutely. So do you want
sharing
me
some
to
of
come
that.
back to that
Why
later?
don't you come back to that? But Andrew, why don't we go to you first? What you see as the priorities overall for nutrition, and what you're doing.
Thank you very much. And again, I extend no apologies from our ministers who were very much wanted to be here, but are very busy doing oral questions in the House of Commons. So, sorry. What I'd say, I think, at the beginning is kind of three main messages from DFID. I think the first thing is that DFID is a really top priority for the British government. We see it as really foundational to development and for underpinning a lot of the delivery across all the MDGs. And for too long, I think it was neglected, and we think for too long there was a focus on some of the other areas. The second thing to say is that we have a strong focus on the first 1,000 days of life is where we believe we can get some of the biggest returns. So we have a very big focus on the pregnancy and then those first couple of years of life for children. In a position paper, which some of you may well have seen, we talk about our kind of overall ambition to reach up to 20 million children under 5 with all our programmes. So we're very much now trying to kind of get on the front foot in setting out the British government's ambition. And then the third point to say is that obviously interest is really growing in the nutrition agenda, and the Sun Network is making great progress. Obviously 33 countries have now joined the network, and the numbers are rising, and there's great momentum behind this, which we as an organisation are very keen to also kind of galvanise and support. So a little bit more on that kind of the first issue really, and kind of how we see some of the best ways to address some of the nutritional problems. We see the private sector really as a key engine of development. Some of you may have seen over the last couple of years, DFID has really revolutionised its approach to working with the private sector, led by our previous Secretary of State. And we're working very closely with the private sector to create jobs and opportunities and kind of income for the poor, which includes some of the work we're doing on making markets work for the poor, which is working with businesses and governments. But we know that low incomes are often a cause of undernutrition, which is often kind of rural families working on very unproductive, very small packages of land, and just can't simply produce enough calories. So we're doing quite a lot of work with smallholders, and we're doing a lot of work in those kind of rural communities to just increase their kind of access to food. Also, we're also working on the demand side as well, trying to kind of improve the amount of food that's in circulation and on the kind of the trade side. But we know that securing a nutritious diet is difficult, but families also are struggling to get the basic services that they need to help protect themselves from malnutrition. So it's it's not just nutrition specific, those broader kind of nutrition sensitive interventions are also really priorities for us. So that's when we're working on our kind of essential healthcare, the water and the sanitation. And in the way of doing this, we're working closely with the private sector. So in Zambia, for example, we have a very exciting piece of work going on with Coca-Cola there, where we're looking at the reach that Coca-Cola has into many of the rural communities and using their distribution trucks to get in oral rehydration sachets, for example, using the kind of spaces between the bottles in the crates. So it's looking for kind of win-win, where we've got an existing kind of health project for water and sanitation, and then trying to kind of think about what the hook is on the nutrition side. I think one of the reasons why we were very keen, DFID, to be kind of present here now and as part of this debate, it was also kind of building on the momentum from the Hunger Summit earlier in the year, and I'm sure many of you were present, and obviously GAME is very important in mobilising and bringing together the private sector for that Hunger Summit. And that was a real opportunity for us to kind of call for governments and everyone to go faster to reach the 170 million children around the world who are affected by malnutrition. And we think that that was quite an effective event. It tried to build some political commitment, collective action, and we are very keen to now build on that momentum. And some of you will be aware that the Prime Minister has announced that next year there will be another kind of a large event here in the UK focused on kind of food and nutrition. And again, we want to keep behind that and very much keep the themes that were in the Hunger Summit alive, which were around the kind of work with the private sector, looking at scaling up agricultural innovations, nutritionally enhanced foods, and strengthening government's accountability as well and the transparency around that. But we want to welcome the opportunity provided by the Sun Business Network to really work with businesses in line with the overall Sun movement. So we think that these light touch private sector initiatives are really critical actually in being able to be more nimble than we are as a government agency often and be able to spot opportunities and to tell us about those and help us to work together. We want to see whether some of our existing partnerships with the private sector can go further in working specifically on nutrition, and are keen to hear about those opportunities and also to get some kind of common objectives and again those new partnerships and new ambitions and new visions together. But also, as I said, the interest is really growing, and we know the EU next year are going to have a focus on kind of food security, and again we're very thrilled to hear the European Commission's recent commitment to reduce the number of stunted children by 7 million by 2025. And again, we're very kind of supportive on that. The G8 New Alliance is another kind of really important initiative for us that the US obviously kicked off earlier this year, and again the partnership with the private sector on that the UK is very keen to take forward next year during our kind of G8 presidency going forward. But I think I'd repeat the point that you also made around evidence and kind of getting to a point where we know what works and why it works and what the context is in which it will be successful and working together to try and get that evidence base together, but on kind of live real time and stopping things that aren't working and starting things that are and trying to be kind of fleet of foot. And I guess, needing feedback as a donor agency where our instruments are not appropriate to doing that and are not supporting that and are sometimes getting in the way of that. And trying to kind of learn a little bit better about how we can adapt and flex. We've set up a lot of new instruments, I think, in DFID in the last couple of years, particularly focused in Africa through a big regional program we have there, but also through our private sector department. Lots of different challenge windows and initiatives, and I think really making sure we're learning in real time about what is and what's not working about those, I think is great to do.
Great. So it comes back to also the sort of research and almost sort of rethinking how we do research. We still need sort of scientific research, but the monitoring and evaluation that we do, we need to think of more creative ways to do monitoring and evaluation so that we can be quicker at responding. Yeah. No, thanks, Andrea. What I'd like to do, in fact, is go to Matthew first, just sort of finish with the donor perspective, and then I'll come back to the private sector perspective. Matthew, can you just sort of share with us a little bit of what you're doing from the perspective of the European Commission, DG?
Certainly, thank you. I was asked to talk a little bit about challenges and opportunities in nutrition. And I think it's probably a challenge for us and our team, and maybe an opportunity for nutrition in general. We're working at the moment on an EU communication on nutrition. An EU communication is another word for an EU policy. We intend that this should be adopted sometime February, March 2013, so next year. And then our member states council will have conclusions on this in May, June of the same year. So we will have a complete EU policy on nutrition that will be adopted at that point. We have perhaps put the cart a little bit before the horse in that we have developed very much technical guidance up to now in the absence of a policy framework. And the idea of putting this policy framework in place is just that, so that we do actually have an underpinning policy framework so that we can continue with the work that we are doing on nutrition. This is not to say that we've been doing nothing up to now. We've been very committed to food security and nutrition for many years, but this is really to take advantage of the interest that there is in this topic and to push it forward a little bit further. Maybe some of the key elements of this communication, which is, as I speak, being drafted. There are three key elements. The first is to enhance the mobilization and political commitment for nutrition. This will be both internationally and at country level. There's been an awful lot of positive work done on mobilization of political commitment, particularly through the Sun movement, but this needs to continue. There's also been work in the G8, which has already been mentioned, and the UK have promised to keep this very high on the G8 agenda this year. So this needs to continue. We need the champions and the interest at country level, but we also need to make sure that at international level that the commitment stays at the top level. The second aspect of the policy will be to scale up actions at country level. This will involve a number of areas, strengthening capacity, developing national strategies and action plans. And when we say developing national strategies and action plans, these need to be costed. If it's not in the budget of a country, it's basically not going to happen. Now, being in the budget of a country doesn't necessarily mean that the partner country needs to find all the money, but there needs to be a budget item there to say we're going to look into nutrition. Otherwise, it simply doesn't happen. And that funding can come from donors, it can come from the partner country itself, but it needs to be there. We need to increase the direct nutrition interventions that we have. We focused a lot on the pillars of food security. We focus very much on production. We will continue to make sure that that is not neglected. But we need to now consider what it is we need to do in terms of direct nutrition interventions. And we need to increase the amount of those that we're doing. We need to promote good practices. We've spoken a lot about breastfeeding and its importance, about the provision of micronutrients, and something that we think is very important, diversification of diet. So all these things on their own, none of them is sufficient. We need to take a more holistic approach and attack undernutrition from these various perspectives. And we need to increase nutrition-sensitive actions. The Nutrition Direct is all very well, but there are so many actions. It's been mentioned. I don't remember at what point it was mentioned today, but it's really the tip of the iceberg are the Nutrition Direct actions. The amount of money that's there in terms of the nutrition-sensitive actions is vastly superior, and we need to make sure that these have an impact as well. The third element of the communication would be to continue to strengthen the expertise and the knowledge base that we actually have for nutrition. I mentioned already the technical reference document that we have on nutrition. But we also have a nutrition advisory service, a team that we have to assist our delegations, to assist others in putting in place nutrition programs. That's at the practical level. But research has been mentioned. It's something that we need to continue. Research and information systems, make sure that they can improve, and to improve the technical expertise that's available in the area of nutrition. So those are the three elements that will form part and parcel of the policy that we intend to develop. It sounds like a lot. We have something like 8 pages, I think, to put this into. So it'll be very much a concise policy framework that will then guide our actions in the future. And that, as I say, will come out hopefully February, March. If we look at other challenges and opportunities that go beyond that, what we specifically are doing, I would highlight maybe 3. One would be certainly to move from this high-level awareness and the interest to the funding and inclusion in the government plans, in the budgets, which I've mentioned already. But it comes back to the interest that we have, and it's fantastic to see the interest we have from the private sector here, but it's 15 companies, more or less. We need to move from this high-level awareness and interest to actually make sure that this actually translates into more nutrition actions, more people investing in nutrition programs, so that it's not just high and nice sounding words. And that's I think a danger. There has been an awful lot of awareness raised. We need now to make sure that awareness is not, that it doesn't fall flat. The second aspect would be the accountability, and for me there are 2 aspects to accountability. One is very simple, or it should be, but apparently it's not, and this is to actually track the amount of funding that we actually have in nutrition. It seems to be very, very difficult indeed. Nutrition specific is one thing, but nutrition-sensitive programs to actually identify what we're doing in this area is very difficult. And it's important to have a baseline to see whether we're actually improving matters. That's one area which, as I say, should be simple, but is not. The other is definitely not simple. It's monitoring and measuring results. And it's one thing measuring a result, but then trying to relate that back to what you've done to see, well, what is it that we can do to make sure we have a good impact and repeat that again somewhere else is something that seems to elude us. So it's something that we need to address, and we need to work together to see how we can do that. And finally, the third element of a challenge I would see is making sure we scale up at country level. From our own perspective, the EU is involved in its programming exercise. This is in full swing at the moment. Our budget runs from up to the end of 2013, and from 2014 to 2020, there's another period of budget, if you like. So during this period, we have to program assistance already at the beginning of 2013. We've identified those countries where food insecurity is a problem. We've identified 52 countries. It's probably not a mystery which countries they are. We know the countries where food insecurity is a problem. And it's our intention to make sure that in consultation with governments that food security, nutrition are selected as sectors where these countries are going to actually put resources and where we can actually come to the assistance of these countries. So in that way, we hope to scale up and really target those countries where food insecurity is an issue. So those are three additional challenges that we would see from our point of view, and that combined with the policy document that we're developing is what I would like to say today.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And one immediate thought, we were talking earlier about wanting to reach out more to the private sector. You're actually sharing the policy document when it comes out in February with the Sun Business Network for feedback and, if not consultation, your ideas how they might then support it.
Certainly. What we have done on the 2 weeks ago, we had a consultation with our member states, but also on the same day with a consultation with a range of stakeholders, including the private sector, civil society, and anybody who's basically interested. So at that point, what we were looking for was inputs to our development of this policy document. And we had quite a successful discussion, and we've asked participants at the meeting and anybody else who feels that they would like to contribute to suggest what it is they would like to see featuring in an EU policy on nutrition. So at the moment we're taking comments that we have received, and on that basis we are drafting and hopefully will produce the communication on the basis of what I've described here. There's still time, not much time, if anybody would like to contribute to this reflection. Luckily, I think there's probably quite a consensus that nutrition is very important. I think there's, we from the consultations that we've heard or that we've carried out, we feel that there's quite a broad consensus on the approach that is to be taken. Of course, there are differences here and there, but I think in general it's an issue that everybody feels needs to be tackled and needs to be tackled quickly. But as I say, input will be very welcome, and the communication, when it's adopted by the College of Commissioners, will be made public as soon as it's adopted.
Great, excellent, good, great, thank you. Well, Nick, you're the business person on the panel here, and I think not only speaking for your own company, but I know the business community and government in Kenya have, I think, an interesting model of having worked together collectively. It'd be great to hear your views from a business perspective, what you see the priorities are in the immediate term for addressing the challenges we've been talking about.
Thanks, Jane. It's tough. There are so many of them. I think first it's just fine to thank WFP and GAME for hosting this. I think some of us only introduced to the word sun a few months ago, so we really are babies on the block, and I think that's part of the problem. There's still an awful lot that we all need to learn about what sun is, what it needs to achieve, and how we can participate. I think also, I think it's very important we recognize the role that the big multinationals have played in getting us here, the Unilevers, the Yaras, the DSMs, the Cokes, the PepsiCos and others. But what amazed me when I walked in yesterday, there's not really that many other people from business here. And my first challenge would be when we meet a year from now, we flipped it on its head, and 80% of the people here recognize business, and I'll come back. And the others that are here from civil society, donors, and the UN are here to act as our coaches and mentors. And I really would encourage that. And just you said you wanted some practical thoughts. I think the first is for the very large companies to reach out and around the world is find 4 or 5 companies that they can bring with them a year from now. And really here I'm looking at transnationals, which I view my company as one. We operate both in Kenya and in Uganda and hopefully any day now in Tanzania. And then you've got very much what are the local companies. I think what is important to recognize, we operate in a very different way. Most of us are family-owned companies. Mine isn't. Mine is publicly listed. But we don't have the same demands from shareholders that Paul has, for example. We can survive on air sometimes. I proudly will admit to selling at below variable margin in some weeks. If you took a guy like Paul, I don't think he could even imagine getting away with selling below variable margin. But that's how we do business. We look at 12 months, we look at 24 months, we don't look at 3 to 4 weeks, 5 weeks. We really don't. So I think my first thing is that we've got to find a way to secure support from the transnationals and from the local companies. Both food companies, food processors, banks, the media, ICT companies, retail companies, and there are many, many. When I think of Kenya, I think about the Great East African Community, and I'll come back and talk about it. So I think we've got to find a way of doing it. They do business very differently. Family companies are a lot more secretive than we would like them to be, but many, many are adapting good governance. They understand. More and more of my competitors, my colleagues, are talking about the possibility of listing themselves on stock exchanges. They're trying to unravel the value of their businesses, and they are very, very good businesses. So finding a way to reach out to them and work with them. And I'll come back and talk about that. Certainly when I read the rules of engagement and things, I think they're very powerful, they're very important. But if I were a smallish transnational or a local company, they'd be pretty frightening. To come from where I am to sign up to a document and rules like that. So whether there's a possibility of phasing in some of those rules of engagement, these are things you must do on day 1. These are things we'd like to see you on day 360. I don't know if that's possible. I know these are very powerful. I certainly am happy to sign up to them from the word go. But this thing isn't going to work if there's just 15 multinationals and another 50 transnationals and locals around the world. I think we've got to find a way to do that. Just by the way, I was talking to Andrea from BASF earlier, and we both agreed on the rules of engagement for business. Maybe a new point too that comes to somebody said earlier today about aspirational products. There's nothing in there about and you'll aspire to bring new products to market, good products. It's all about ethics and morals, which is important, but there's nothing about what we're going to do with it. So maybe a suggestion from the two of us, he's gone already, to maybe modify that a little bit and see if we can talk about what we're going to do with once we engage in those rules of engagement.
Point, yep.
I think some of the others are very obvious, again, picking up on something someone said. When we start to work in this partnership, absolutely we've got to listen and understand, and really listen, truly to listen, and understand to truly to understand. And I think that means, and my company needs to do it, government needs to do it, civil society, donors, put people in the rooms to have those discussions that actually want to listen and understand. I love activists. Activists have changed the world, but they're not very good to have in a room when you're trying to build partnerships. We have activists in business, you've got activists in civil society, you've got activists in government. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but I think to really build these partnerships, all of us in the four groups need to identify the right people to have the right conversations with the right organizations. And people who are, and they don't mean to be that way, they're just somewhat destructive in these conversations. We need to send them on vacation or give them something else to do where it's important. Transparency, we've talked about transparency at the big level. When you're in these conversations, we have got to lay everything on the table. I think if you leave something behind, and particularly like in here where you've got these four-way groups in here, two groups are having their little chat about the other two groups. Stuff gets discussed over coffee. We're going to have to find a way to say, listen, in this room we all belong together, because why I'm interested in this, we can make the most phenomenal difference to our world. This is not a game. This is very, very serious. In my company, we have nothing like the resources that a Unilever has. But we're going to try and play our own little role with what little money we have and try and influence a few others, like-minded people, to do it. The other thing which was talked about before was having a single agenda. I still do not understand as a business why in Kenya I have to talk to 4 or 5 different donors to achieve the same objective. I understand why, actually. They all have nice homes. They drive 4x4 Prados. I find them in the game parks at the weekend. It's wonderful. But from a business perspective, I still see an inefficient use of resources. And I really think maybe there's a lead organization per country, a lead organization per region, and the rest of us all get aligned. We need the money. That's not the problem. But it's how we utilize it and make most value of it. It won't be easy. We've all got our own agendas. I have mine. But if under the leadership of what we've got, just a couple of little things, Jane, I just wanted to share. To make this agenda move forward, we need massive testing capability and competency in place for micronutrient evaluation where we're fortifying foods.
So coming back to the
We
research.
need lots of help. The government has got to let go and let the private sector set up laboratories, and those of us that do that have to do it properly. You talked about mycotoxins, one of my pet. There's a lot of aflatoxin in Kenya this year, and it isn't in diseased and discolored maize. It's actually in white maize, sir. And when we move to complementary foods in villages, there is a lot of aflatoxin in those grains. So you're making a nutritious food, you're putting a whacking great logo on it and saying this is great for you, but you're quietly consuming mycotoxins. We've got to find a way to quick test kits, etc., to try and link those two. And that really comes to my last point before I close, is we need to produce these foods very, very cheaply. Raw material prices are going up and up. We have probably the 3rd most expensive maize in the world in Kenya at the moment. We've got very expensive wheat. We're duty protecting it, which is important. It's to encourage local farmers, but we're paying world market prices. The government says it's those countries are subsidizing their foods, so we can't be. But it means that these foods we need to produce for the Ds and Es are not going to be affordable. We've taken a position in Kenya to ban GMOs again. I'm pro-GMO for the right, as long as it's tested. I think that technology, so I think it comes to what we said, Jane. We've got to pull all these pillars together with one mission, is to provide good nutrition to all. The last request I have is to my brother from Tanzania. Ndugu iko wapi? Iko hapo nyuma. Yeah, there is. Karibu. Is why can't we have a Sun initiative that belongs to East Africa? Why are we going to do one per each country? Maybe we could do one. Tanzania's really moving forward. Kenya's about to move. Let's try and get Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, maybe South Sudan on board and have one big, powerful movement in our region. We'll have to bury a few egos now and again on all sides. It's tough, but why not? Thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you, all of you. Yeah. Now I'm fast running out of time, but I've got time for probably 2 questions, comments from the floor.
Thank you. My name is David McNair from Save the Children UK. We've talked a lot about getting more businesses on board and production of new products and so on. And I think there is consensus that 2013 is a year when the stars are aligning for nutrition in terms of all of the different policy moments. But one area that we haven't talked about as much is the important role of advocacy, political advocacy, advocacy on the global stage and at the national level. And I've certainly seen in my work the power of businesses coming together, speaking with a unified voice, saying that this is important. And I would just appeal to the businesses in the room and your networks to work with us during 2013 to speak with this one voice and ensure that nutrition is at the top of the political agenda. Thank you.
For my voice. My name is Trevor Eggleton. I'm with the Micronutrient Initiative. MI is part of the SUN Act Advocacy and Communications team. And it sort of piggybacks on what David was just talking about, communications and advocacy. And I sort of see it as being, we talk about the car moving forward, and I see there being somewhat like the fuel or the motor moving it forward. We talk about a movement, and I was just wondering if the panel had any advice, because we have a meeting on the 17th, that I can bring back, as far as communications, advocacy, connecting all those networks to propel the movement forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you. What would you sort of like to have seen been achieved by the business network?
Start on research and
And
then
start
do-
on research and then
continue.
look what
So,
you'd like to see achieved. Yeah.
The research, well, a lot of us have talked about the importance of research and using universities. I'd say using the CGIAR centers as well. Linking the great work that's happening in universities with what institutes like IFPRI and CIMMYT and IITA are doing. That kind of, there's a big, I think, international movement that a lot of donors, DFID and CETA, are participating in and trying to get those better linkages. And it cuts across the pure ag research, ag scientific research, nutrition research, and social research as well, because a big element of this is social. And IFPRI has been a great partner in that, Tufts University. We developed a Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index, which I think is really groundbreaking, as a partnership with Oxford and IFPRI. I think those kinds of partnerships, bring in lots of creative ideas. We have a recent agreement with MIT to kind of do a consumer reports of technology for us. I think looking at technologies that are out there and advising us on what's really the best, most impactful, most cost-effective, appropriate technologies for the poor. But our kind of ag research agenda is focused on sustainable intensification. How do we dramatically increase productivity in ways that don't have negative impacts on the climate without increasing water use, without increasing land area planted, and focusing it on kind of what we see as the most challenging agroecological zones, the highlands of Ethiopia, the East and Southern Africa, maize systems, the Sahel, and then the Indo-Gangetic Plains in Bangladesh, India. So we think those are where the big challenges are in climate impacts and nutrition challenges. So focusing on those areas, focusing on increasing productivity and improving nutritional outcomes, but bringing in a broad group of people. And part of that, I think, is harmonizing efforts of donors around what are the key questions. So we've been working with Gates, with the World Bank, with DFID, in thinking about what's our comprehensive learning agenda across food and nutrition. A lot of donors are doing research, but what are the big questions that we agree on that need an answer to, and how can we make sure that our efforts are all harmonized there? And I agree with Nick that donor collaboration is important, and donor efficiency and collaboration is important, and I like the idea of a donor leader, a donor convener in every country per sector, and we're certainly moving towards that.
Great. Good.
Do you want to say
Good.
closing words now
And
or
then
after?
anything, do you want to make some closing comments also on what you'd like to see business having achieved?
The three things I'd say for where we'd love to see business. The first is I'd say participate, participate, participate. I like Nick's comment about the transnational and multinational corporations bringing others in. I think it's easy for the private sector to get frustrated with endless donor meetings. It's easy for donors to get frustrated with endless donor meetings. But I'd say put up with it because we need your ideas and feedback. Someone mentioned or maybe a couple of people mentioned the G8. And under the U.S. presidency of the G8 this year, our big focus was private sector and agriculture, private sector investment. And one of the biggest consequences of that for me was creating a regular forum for dialogue between developing countries and the private sector, their own private sector and multinational companies. Because in a lot of these countries, they don't have that dialogue that we're more used to in the West that gives them constant feedback on what is an appropriate policy framework for investment. So to me, just private sector participation actively to give feedback to us as donors and down at the country level to give feedback to countries is critically important. I'd go back to the first point I made before. I would love to see the private business networks work jointly with us on developing concrete models that can be replicated, publicized.
Fantastic, great, thank you. Andrea, closing comments, what do you want to see from business?
Yeah, I mean, I think 2013 is a year of amazing opportunity. I think it's an opportunity for the British government with both the Prime Minister's role as co-chair on the high-level panel to really be pushing an agenda which talks about hunger and nutrition when all people across the world should have access to adequate and affordable nutrition. I think there's a G8 presidency where there's a very strong set of themes running through that, which the Prime Minister calls the golden thread, which is the transparency, accountability, open societies, open economies, which has a big focus on things like trade and agricultural markets. And I think there's a big opportunity there. There's also the G20, where we understand Russia also is interested in having a kind of food security theme going through on the G20. And we also, the Lancet are talking about doing something with nutrition. We have a food event that as many of you are aware, we're working towards now. So there's a huge number of kind of big set pieces, I think, that will be taking place next year. Some of them, particularly the G20 with the B20, which is aligned already, has a very clear kind of private sector forum and access point. I think the others, there are opportunities there to create access points and to work together, but I think the key is not to be a disparate range of voices all having slightly different agendas with slightly different points to make, which are then incredibly difficult from a kind of government's point of view to engage with, and to kind of understand should it be the loudest voice that you engage with, and kind of coming together and mobilizing together, and also being incredibly evidence-based, because I think part of the problem sometimes on the advocacy front is it's just not evidence-based enough. And so some of the advocacy from a civil society point of view is about getting headlines, it's about mobilizing people and populations, and I know there's a plan for mobilizing tens of millions of people in the UK next year around kind of hunger, nutrition, food, but the issue is that if that's not based on evidence, and I think it has to be in order to then work in partnership successfully with people in a range of different sectors. And then I guess I'd just say the second point is on the regional point, which I thought was really interesting. We have such a big focus through our kind of Pan-Africa Free Trade Initiative and through the different, particularly in East Africa, we have a very strong component of work there going on, particularly on infrastructure and borders and free markets. And I will go back and think with colleagues about the opportunities at the AU Summit and the kind of Grow Africa events that are planned in May in Cape Town will offer, particularly on the Africa side. I think that's a really interesting kind of avenue. And again, I don't know what the private sector dimension is and the way in which the private sector are engaged with the kind of the Grow Africa and the World Economic Forum, but obviously they'll be there. So I think seeing what we can do to kind of capitalise and work together on that, I think would be very important. And then the final point is just, again, back to the kind of what works, what's the evidence, bring it forward, let's learn together, and then we can all kind of harness the resources behind it.
On specific business models, great, thank you. Nick, a few closing comments. Eddie, what
12 months from now, there's a whole lot more of us here from business. We're passionate, and that and I'm not sure what the mechanism is to stand up and review how the countries have done. But when the reviews are done, it's pretty obvious that business has helped make a difference, and we haven't sat on the sidelines and watched everyone else do the work.
Great, thank you, and thank you for the leadership role you're already playing. Thank you. Matthew.
Very briefly on research, the EU spends an awful lot of money on research in agriculture, nutrition, food security. We will continue to do that for the next financial perspectives. We regard research as a global public good, and we've talked a lot about the pre-competitive space. So maybe that's somewhere that research could fit into. In terms of involving the private sector, it's been really instructional over the last 24 hours. The private sector, we see it as the missing link, but we need to learn how to engage with the private sector as donors. We don't really know how to do so yet, and I think events like this are certainly a learning experience for people from the donor side. I think we need to take very much a long-term view. Many developing countries offer a huge potential, but it's in the long term. And governments in developing countries need to create an environment that is enabling for business. This was one of the planks of the new alliance that Paul mentioned. It's very much the creation of an enabling environment so that business can actually get involved. 3 very quick things that I think might be interesting, some ideas as to what would be nice to see in 12 months' time. During the course of the G8, we had letters of intent that were signed by business. I think there is something like 70 businesses for 6 pilot countries that signed letters of intent to invest in these 6 pilot countries. It would be nice to have something like that for nutrition. The role of the lead group, I think, we've mentioned the lead group once or twice. I think it's very important to recall that one of the key roles of the lead group is to build the investment case. And I think that is something that needs to be done. We need to bring more businesses on board, businesses from partner countries, but also businesses from Europe, from the US, and everywhere else. So the investment case needs to be built. And as I mentioned earlier on, I would like to see certainly an improved tracking and measurement of impact. So those, when we come back here in 12 months' time, those are things that I think would be important to remember.
Great. Well, thank you very, very much, all 4 of you. And I think there's a few final comments from me that it seems some very common themes both coming from this and other panels today. First of all, so very, very clearly that focus on country leadership and country ownership with, sort of regional learning and components, which is both about the political will and political leadership, but national companies and national business associations taking a lead at the country level and donor coordination, so that country focus so clear. I think secondly, this sort of question of business engagement, which is both innovative and principled. And I think it's, we recognize the need for the principles and to be meeting the principles, but it's about being principled and innovative and recognizing the 2 of them together. And I think in the principles, sort of talking about the positive contribution business can make and focusing on both learning from the core business models and really learning in depth what those business models are about. And this very important point that's come out again and again of evidence-based research. And we need evidence-based research on the science, and I think there's real opportunity for collaboration there, but also evidence-based research on the models of what works and what doesn't. And I think an opportunity for independent partnerships with universities there as well. And the role that business can play both through its core business models, but also you mentioned the program with General Mills and DSM and a few others where they're providing technical volunteering. So it's also sort of technical partnerships, and very much the point taken by Save the Children of advocacy partnerships, and whether the Sun Business Network and the Sun Civil Society Network can come together around advocacy partnerships. So I think that's a sort of second key point of this role of business. Grow Africa has been mentioned several times, and that might be an interesting overlap with the Grow Africa countries and companies and the Sun Network to think about. And then the third and final point for me, which I think has come through very much from Jay and others' comments throughout the day, is that the country ownership is important, the business leadership is important, but never, ever for 1 minute losing sight of the individual consumers and producers and the people on the ground who are at the heart of this movement, who are not just there as beneficiaries, but who are there very much as what this movement is all about. And the smallholder farmers, the small millers, the small agri-dealers, the consumers, the families, the women in their homes, the women's cooperatives, etc., making sure that we find ways to bring them more into the conversation, very much as the other component of what we're about and the core of this whole movement. Because as you said this morning, Jay, movements don't start at conferences, they start with people on the ground, and recognizing that, I think, is critical. And your business touches, and the private sector touches billions of those people every day, so making that connection, I think, is very important. But thank you very much to our panel. I'd like to ask Jim and Jay to come up for closing comments, and Mark. Thank you very, very much to the panel. Thank you.